The heat had been sitting on the terrified earth for 3 weeks. A heavy, motionless weight that smelled of dry sage and dust ground fine as flour. It was late August in the territory, a time when the sun usually began to lose its angry bite, but this year the summer refused to die. The air shimmered above the baked hard pan, distorting the horizon until the distant mesas looked like they were melting into the ground. Then the change came, sudden and violent, as if the sky had finally run out of patience. It started with an unnatural silence. The cicadas, which had been screaming in the cottonwoods since dawn, cut off all at once. The wind died. The heat spiked, sharp and suffocating, before the temperature plummeted 20 degrees in the span of a single hour. Luke Mercer felt the shift in his bones before he saw it in the clouds. He was riding point on a small herd of steers he had been paid to push toward the railhead, a detour that had taken him dangerously close to the canyon road. He pulled his roan gelding to a halt and tipped the brim of his hat back, squinting at the northern horizon. The sky was turning a bruised green, the color of a healing punch, churning with clouds that looked heavy enough to crush the mountains beneath them. Luke was a man built of sharp angles and silence. He was 32 years old, but carried the weathered lines of a man a decade older. His face tanned to the color of saddle leather and his eyes the gray of a winter creek. He was known in the bunkhouses from Texas to Wyoming as a hand who did his work, took his pay, and never asked a question he did not need the answer to. He was steady. That was the word men used. Steady, and dangerous if you pressed him, though he never went looking for trouble. He watched the clouds boil. A crack of thunder split the air, a sound so loud it felt like the earth itself had snapped. Luke flinched. It was a small movement, a tightening of the shoulders, a blink that lasted a fraction of a second too long. The sound reminded him of a bottle breaking against a wall, a specific memory from a life he had buried 5 years ago. He could still smell the cheap whiskey and the copper tang of blood whenever a sudden sharp noise caught him off guard. He shook his head, clearing the memory, and looked down at his hands. They were wrapped in leather gloves, holding the reins with a loose competence. He kept his hands busy. That was his rule. If his hands were working, his mind stayed quiet. He turned in the saddle, looking back at the 2 young drovers struggling to keep the nervous steers bunched. "Get them to the high pasture," Luke shouted, his voice rough but carrying easily over the rising wind. "Leave the strays. This storm is going to tear the bottom out of the gulch." He did not wait for an acknowledgement. He spurred the roan, turning away from the herd and toward the canyon road. He had no business there. Technically, the cattle were his job, but the canyon road crossed the creek at the Narrows, and if this storm broke the way the sky promised, that creek was going to turn into a killer. He had a feeling in his gut, a cold prickle at the base of his neck that told him someone might be down there. He had made a promise to himself years ago, standing over a fresh grave in Abilene. He would not be the man who looked away again. 5 miles to the west, the storm was already hammering the roof of the way station. The building was an ugly, squat structure of timber and adobe, clinging to the edge of the canyon like a stubborn barnacle. It had been a toll stop once, back when the mines were open, but now it was just a place for stages to change horses and for desperate travelers to pray the rain would stop. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wool and old coffee. Mari Delgado stood on a chair, hammering a piece of canvas over a leaking section of the roof. She drove the nail home with 3 efficient strikes, her jaw set in a hard line. She was a woman of mixed heritage, with the dark eyes of her Mexican mother and the sharp, high cheekbones of her Irish father. She wore a man's work shirt, too large for her, the sleeves rolled down and buttoned tight at the wrists. She always kept her arms covered. It was a habit born of necessity, a way to hide the yellow and purple bruises that sometimes bloomed there like unwanted flowers. The bruises were fading now, ghost marks from a life she was trying to forget. But the sleeves stayed down. She stepped down from the chair, wiping dust from her hands. She did not look at the 2 women sitting near the cold stove. She did not want their pity. She had learned long ago that pity was the most expensive thing a woman could accept. It always came with a debt attached. The wind howled outside, slamming against the adobe walls with enough force to make the lantern flames dance. "I do not think it is going to stop," Grace Whitfield said. Her voice was thin, threaded with a panic she was trying very hard to swallow. Grace sat on a wooden crate, her posture rigid. She was 24, dressed in a traveling suit of navy blue wool that was dusty and wrinkled. A small velvet hat sat askew on her head, pinned to hair the color of corn silk. On her lap, she clutched a leather valise as if it contained the crown jewels. It held only books and a letter, the paper worn soft from being unfolded and read 100 times. Grace was a schoolteacher, or she had been, until the whispers started. She was running from a town 3 days' ride to the east, running from a respectable life that had turned its teeth on her the moment she refused to smile at the wrong man. Marie looked at her, her expression unreadable. "It will stop when it stops." Marie said, "The creek is rising." The third woman, Lynn May, said nothing. She was crouching by the wood box, counting the split logs. She was small, her movements precise and economical. She wore a simple tunic and trousers made of rough cotton, and her black hair was pulled back in a severe braid. Her hands were red and chapped, the skin roughened by lye soap and hard scrubbing. Lynn May was used to being invisible. In the railroad camps and the laundry houses, she was treated as a piece of furniture, something to be used and ignored until it broke. She felt Grace's eyes on her, a gaze mixed with curiosity and a vague, ingrained disdain. But Lynn May did not look up. She kept her eyes on the wood. She spoke carefully when she had to speak at all, measuring every word, because she knew how easily words could be twisted into a noose. "We have wood for 6 hours," Lynn May said softly. Her English was accented but clear. "If the roof holds, it will hold," Marie said, though she glanced upward as a fresh gust of wind shook the rafters. The door to the back room was closed. Inside lay a traveler, a man who had arrived 2 days ago with a fever that made him thrash and scream about devils. He was quiet now, which Marie knew was a bad sign, but there was nothing more she could do for him. The road to the east had washed out in a mudslide an hour ago, cutting off their retreat. The only way forward was the bridge, and the bridge was screaming. Through the thick adobe walls, they could hear it, the deep, groaning complaint of timber being twisted by water. The creek, usually a lazy ribbon of brown water, had swollen into a raging torrent, fed by the cloudbursts in the high country. It was chewing at the banks, eating away the earth that held the bridge pilings. They were trapped. Marie walked to the window and peered out through the shutters. The world outside was a gray blur of rain. She could just make out the dark shape of the bridge, a wooden skeleton trembling against the flood. "We should have left this morning," Grace whispered. "And gone where?" Marie asked without turning. "The road was already bad. You want to be stuck in a wagon in this mud?" "I want to be anywhere but here," Grace said, her voice rising. "I have to get to the railhead. If I miss the train on Friday—" "You are not missing anything yet," Marie said sharply. "Sit down. Save your strength." Suddenly, the sound of hooves splashed through the mud outside. A horse whinnied, a terrified sound that was instantly swallowed by the wind. Marie moved instantly. She reached behind the counter and pulled out a double-barreled shotgun. It was old and the stock was cracked, but she held it with a familiarity that made Grace gasp. "Stay there," Marie commanded. The door burst open. Wind and rain lashed into the room, soaking the floorboards in seconds. A man stood in the doorway, water pouring off the brim of his hat. He was wrapped in a yellow oilskin slicker, and his face was hidden in shadow. He did not step inside. He stayed on the threshold, the storm raging behind him. "Crow sent me," the man shouted. Marie lowered the barrel of the gun slightly, but she did not uncock the hammers. Silas Crow. The name was like a curse in this county. He was a rancher who owned more land than God and owned the sheriff besides. He controlled the road, the tolls, and the truth. "What does Crow want?" Marie shouted back. "The bridge is bad," the man yelled. He had to scream to be heard over the roar of the water. "He says you stay put. Do not try to cross. He has men coming to watch the road. You wait for help." "Help?" Mari laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Since when does Silas Crow send help? Since he has an interest in who goes in and out of this canyon? The man sneered. He looked past Mari, his eyes lingering on Grace's terrified face, and then sliding dismissively over Lin May. You stay put. If we catch you on the road, Crow will take it as an insult. And you know what happens then. He backed out, slamming the door against the wind. They heard him spur his horse, the hoofbeats fading instantly into the storm. Grace was shaking. Who is he? Why can we not leave? Because Silas Crow does not want witnesses, Mari said. She leaned the shotgun back against the counter, her hands trembling slightly. She hid them in her pockets. Travelers have been disappearing on this road, women, and Crow controls the only way out. Lin May stood up. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. He said wait for help, but his voice, it did not sound like help. No, Mari said. It sounded like a cage closing. Outside, the storm shifted gears. The rain turned to hail, rattling against the walls like buckshot. The roar of the creek deepened, a chaotic churning sound that vibrated through the floorboards. Luke Mercer reached the crest of the ridge overlooking the creek just as the sun began to fail behind the storm clouds. The light was dying, turning the world into a landscape of gray shadows and black water. He pulled the roan up short. The horse danced sideways, fighting the bit, eyes rolling white in the gloom. Easy, Luke murmured, stroking the wet neck. Easy now. Below him, the creek had vanished. In its place was a monster. The water had risen 10 feet in 3 hours. It was a churning brown slurry of mud, uprooted trees, and dead cattle, moving with terrifying speed. It smashed against the canyon walls, carving out fresh scars in the rock. And there, in the center of the chaos, stood the bridge. It was a wooden truss bridge, built 20 years ago and neglected for 10. The water was already slapping at the deck planks. A massive cottonwood tree, its roots still tangled with earth, slammed into the center piling with a sound like a cannon shot. The whole structure shuddered. Luke looked across the torrent. On the far bank, barely visible through the sheets of rain, a single yellow light flickered. The way station. He knew who ran it. The widow Delgado. He had never spoken to her, but he had seen her in town once, buying flour with a look of defiance that dared anyone to cheat her. She was trapped, and if that light was burning, she wasn't alone. Luke looked back the way he had come. The trail behind him was safe. He could turn the roan around, ride back to the high ground, and wait the storm out under a tarp. It was the sensible thing to do. It was the survival thing to do. No one would blame him. No one would even know he had been here. He looked at the water again. It was black and thick, smelling of torn earth. It was death, plain and simple. But he heard the sound of the bottle breaking in his memory. He saw the face of the girl in Abilene he hadn't helped because he didn't want to get involved. He felt the weight of the silence he had carried for 5 years. He swore softly, a single harsh word lost to the wind. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. He checked his cinch, pulling the leather strap tight until the roan grunted. He checked the bridle, making sure the bit was seated. He took his lariat and tied one end to the saddle horn, coiling the rest loosely in his hand. He wasn't going to look away. He mounted up. The roan balked, smelling the danger. Luke pressed his knees into the horse's sides, his grip on the reins firm but not cruel. We have got to go. Horse, Luke said. He rode down the slick, muddy bank. He didn't head for the bridge. The bridge was a trap now. One more hit from a log and it would collapse under a rider. He headed for a spot 50 yards upstream, where the bank sloped gently into the boil. He had to judge the current. If he entered too high, he'd be smashed against the canyon wall. If he entered too low, he'd be swept into the bridge pilings and crushed. He waited for a break in the debris. A dead cow tumbled past, bloating and pale. Then a tangle of brush. Then a gap. Now! Luke drove the spurs in. The roan leapt forward, hitting the water with a massive splash. The cold hit Luke like a hammer. It wasn't just water. It was melted snow and hail, freezing and thick with silt. It soaked through his duster, his jeans, his boots. stealing his breath in a gasp. The horse went under, then surfaced, swimming hard. The current grabbed them instantly, spinning them downstream. The world became a chaotic blur of water and motion. Luke focused entirely on the horse's head. Keep his nose up. Nose. Keep him pointing across. Debris clawed at Luke's legs. A branch struck his thigh, tearing the denim and bruising the muscle. But he didn't feel the pain. He felt only the terrifying power of the river. It wanted to take them. It wanted to pull them down and roll them along the bottom until they were nothing but meat and bone. They were halfway across. The bridge loomed to their right, close enough that Luke could hear the timbers screaming as the water pushed against them. The roan was tiring. The horse's eyes were wild, nostrils flared wide, sucking in air and water. "Come on," Luke roared. He leaned forward, grabbing the mane, willing his own strength into the animal. "Do not quit on me." A massive log, stripped of bark and slick as bone, surged out of the darkness upstream. It was aiming straight for them. Luke saw it coming. He yanked the left rein, forcing the horse's head around. The roan fought him, panicked, but Luke held the tension. The log missed the horse's flank by inches, the wake of its passing swamping them. They went under again. Luke swallowed a mouthful of grit and water. He kicked free of the stirrups, terrified of being dragged down, but kept his grip on the mane. They surfaced, coughing and sputtering. The far bank was 20 feet away. It was steep and muddy, a wall of clay. The roan found footing on a submerged sandbar and lunged. The horse scrambled, hooves slipping on the slick mud. Luke grabbed a willow branch overhanging the water, the bark tearing his gloves, and used it to haul himself and the horse forward. With a final, heaving effort, the roan surged up the bank. Collapsing onto the wet grass at the top, Luke rolled out of the saddle and hit the ground hard. He lay there for a moment, face in the mud, gasping for air that felt too thin. His body was shaking so hard his teeth rattled. He rolled onto his back. The rain beat down on his face, washing away the mud. He was alive. He sat up, wiping water from his eyes. He looked toward the bridge. Luke crosses the flooded creek to reach the trapped women before the bridge is gone forever. Knowing he might not cross back, he stood up, his legs trembling. He grabbed the roan's reins and led the exhausted horse toward the light of the station. Inside the station, the women had gone silent. They had heard the splash, the shout, but dismissed it as the storm playing tricks. Then the door opened. Luke stood there, a drowned rat of a man. Water poured from his clothes, pooling on the floorboards. His hat was gone. His dark hair was plastered to his skull. There was blood on his cheek where a branch had whipped him, and his hands were raw. He looked at them, his chest heaving. Mari raised the shotgun. Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" Luke leaned against the doorframe, unable to stand straight. "Name is Mercer," he rasped. "Bridge is going." Grace let out a small sob and covered her mouth. "He came," she whispered. Someone came. Lin May stayed by the woodbox, her eyes dark and assessing. She looked at Luke's hands, then at his exhausted horse standing outside in the rain. She saw the lack of a badge, the lack of a gun in his hand. She saw a man who had nearly died to get here. "He is not one of Crow's men," Lin May said quietly. Luke stepped inside, closing the door against the wind. The simple action seemed to take the last of his strength. He stumbled, catching himself on a table. "I saw the light," Luke said, before Mari could answer. A sound ripped through the night, a sound louder than the thunder. Crack, crack, boom. It sounded like a tree snapping, magnified 100 times. Then came a terrible, tearing screech of wood being ripped apart, followed by a thunderous splash that shook the ground beneath the station. The women froze. Luke didn't turn around. He closed his eyes. "That is it," he said softly. Mari ran to the window. In the flashes of lightning, she saw the empty space where the bridge had been. The center span was gone, carried away into the dark. The toll road ended in a jagged tear of timber and nothingness. The silence that followed was heavy. The roar of the water seemed closer now, hungrier. They were cut off. The road behind was gone. The bridge ahead was gone. They were an island in the storm. Mari turned back to the room. She looked at Luke, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the exhaustion, the blood, the way he held himself upright by sheer will. Her suspicion didn't vanish. She had held on to it for too long to let it go that easily, but it shifted. "Sit down," Mari said, gesturing to the chair by the stove, "before you fall down." Luke nodded. He sank into the chair, the wood groaning under his weight. He began to shiver, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the bone-deep cold of the river. Grace moved to the window, staring out at the darkness where the bridge had been. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We wait," Luke said. His teeth chattered on the words. "Crow's men cannot cross either." "Not tonight." Lin May moved silently to the stove. She poured a cup of coffee from the pot. The liquid blackened strong. She brought it to Luke, holding it out with both hands. "Drink," she said. "It is hot." Luke took the cup. His hands were shaking so badly the coffee sloshed over the rim, burning his skin. He didn't flinch. He wrapped his fingers around the warmth, grateful for the pain because it meant he could still feel. "Thank you, ma'am," he muttered. The night deepened. The storm settled into a steady, relentless drumming. They took stock of what they had. Mari counted the cans of beans and the dried beef. Lin May checked the blankets. Most were damp from the leaks, but a few near the stove were dry. Grace sat with her book, not reading, just holding it like a shield. The injured man in the back room groaned, a low sound of distress. Mari went to check on him. Returning with a grim face, he was burning up. Luke finished the coffee. He started to peel off his soaked gloves. The leather was slick with water and blood. He hissed as the material pulled away from his skin. "Let me see," Mari said. She didn't ask. She pulled a stool over and sat in front of him. She took his hands in hers. Her hands were warm, rough, calloused, but warm. She looked at his knuckles, which were scraped raw and bleeding. There was a deep gash across the back of his left hand where the debris had hit him. Luke watched her. He was used to tending his own hurts. He wasn't used to this, the gentle, efficient way she turned his hand to the light, the way she frowned in concentration. She reached for a bottle of iodine and a clean rag. "This will sting," she said. "Do it," Luke said. She dabbed the iodine on the cut. It burned like fire. Luke's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek, but he didn't pull away. Mari worked quietly. She cleaned the mud from his palms, wiping away the blood. For a moment, she paused. Her thumb brushed against the pulse in his wrist. It was beating hard and steady against her skin. She looked up. Her eyes met his. They were close, in the small circle of lamplight. The rest of the room seemed to fade away. Luke saw the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. He saw the fatigue etched around her mouth, and the strength that held her together. Mari saw a man who had ridden into hell because he saw a light. She saw the gray eyes that watched her without demanding anything. It was a dangerous moment. It was the kind of moment that could crumble walls that had taken years to build. Mari pulled her hand back. She corked the iodine bottle with a sharp twist. "Keep it dry," she said, her voice brisk. "I will try," Luke said. He didn't move his hand immediately. He let it rest on his knee, the spot where she had touched him still tingling. Outside, the river roared, eating the earth. But inside, for the first time that night, the cold didn't feel quite so absolute. The morning broke with a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the canyon. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that looked raw and flayed. The air was thick with the metallic scent of torn earth, wet sage, and the pungent, sulphurous smell of mud that had been churned up from the creek bed. Luke Mercer stood on the porch of the way station, watching the sun struggle to crest the eastern ridge. Below him, the creek was still swollen, a brown muscle of water flexing against the rocks, but the violence had dialed back from a roar to a deep, sullen grumble. The bridge was gone. not just broken, but erased. The only proof it had ever existed was a jagged splinter of timber protruding from the mud on the far bank, looking like a broken bone sticking out of the earth. He held a cup of coffee in his hand, but he was not drinking it. He was watching the ground near the hitching rail. The mud there was a chaotic mess of hoofprints, washed smooth by the rain but still visible. But 5 yards away, in the shelter of a limestone overhang that had stayed dry, he saw something else, a cigarette stub, then another, and the faint, distinct impression of a boot heel that had shifted back and forth, waiting. Someone had been here. Not during the worst of it, perhaps, but certainly before the sun came up. They had sat in the dark, smoking, watching the station windows. Luke tipped the dregs of his coffee into the dirt. He felt the old familiar coldness settle in his gut. It was the feeling he used to get before a drive started, or before a fight broke out in a saloon. The tightening of the world until only the immediate threats remained. He turned and went back inside. The interior of the station was dim, lit only by the gray light leaking through the shutters. The air smelled of damp wool and sickness. The traveler in the back room, a man whose name they had never learned, had died in the quiet hours before dawn. His fever had burned him out like a candle. Mari had closed his eyes and covered him with a sheet, her face set in a mask of grim practicality. Now, the women were moving with the sluggish, shocked motions of survivors. Mari Delgado was at the stove, scraping the last of the cornmeal mush into a pan. She moved with a stiff precision, ignoring the exhaustion that painted purple shadows under her eyes. She wore her grief like she wore her long sleeves, buttoned up tight. Luke walked to the table where he had spread out a rough map drawn on the back of an old ledger page. "We cannot stay here," Luke said. His voice was low, but it cut through the silence of the room. Mari stopped stirring. She did not turn around. "And we cannot go back," she said. "The road is a slide. The bridge is gone." "We walk out," Luke said. "We leave the wagon. We take the horses and what supplies we can carry on the saddles. We go up the ridgeline to the west." Grace Whitfield looked up from her crate. She looked brittle, as if a loud noise might shatter her into porcelain shards. "Walk?" she asked. "To where?" "The town is east. Town is not safe," Luke said. "It is safer than the wilderness," Grace argued, her voice rising. "There are laws in town. There is a sheriff. There is Silas Crow," Mari said. She turned then, the wooden spoon gripped in her hand like a weapon. "The sheriff eats at Crow's table. If we go to town now, dragging ourselves in like beggars, Crow will write the story before we even open our mouths. He will say we are looters. He will say we trespassed. Or worse," Luke added. He looked at the women. Grace, terrified and clinging to the rules of a civilization that was miles away. Lynn May, silent in the corner, packing dried beef into a sack with efficient, rough hands. And Mari, who looked like she was ready to fight the entire world, but was terrified of what would happen when she lost. Luke tapped the map. "There is an old line shack 2 days' ride north, along the high ridge. It is rough country, but it keeps us off the main road. From there, we circle wide to Falsley Creek. There was a judge who used to ride circuit there, Judge Halloway. If he is still alive, he is honest." "2 days?" Grace whispered. She looked down at her velvet shoes, which were already ruined by mud. Mari walked over to the table. She looked at the map, then at Luke. Her eyes were dark and hard. "You want to take us into the high country. With no tent, with barely enough food. I want to keep you alive," Luke said. He met her gaze and held it. Whoever was watching the house last night did not come in to help. They were waiting to see if the flood did the work for them. Marie's hand went to her throat, touching the collar of her shirt. It was a reflexive gesture, a protection of the skin beneath. Luke noticed she wore no wedding ring, though he knew she was a widow. There was a pale band of skin on her finger where gold had once been. But the ring was gone, sold, perhaps, or thrown away. "I am not leaving this station to become a ghost in the mountains," Mari said. "I have held this roof up for 3 years. I have patched it and scrubbed it and defended it, and now it is a trap," Luke said gently. He saw the fear behind her anger. It wasn't just fear of the elements. It was a fear of being unmoored. As long as she had the station, she had a place, she had dignity. If she walked out into the sagebrush, she was just another woman alone in a territory that consumed women like her. "I know what it cost to walk away," Luke said, his voice dropping an octave. "I know you built this, but the men coming for us do not care about what you built. They only care about what you know." "What do we know?" Grace snapped. She stood up, hugging her valise to her chest. "We know the bridge fell down. That is an accident of weather, is it?" Lin May spoke for the first time. She stood up from the corner. She held up a piece of heavy hemp rope. It was the end of a tether line, used to secure the bridge beams to the anchors. The end was not frayed. It was clean. It was cut. Lin May said. She tossed the rope onto the table. It landed with a heavy, wet thump. The room went dead silent. Grace stared at the rope, her mouth opening and closing. "Why?" she breathed. "Because a bridge that falls takes the road with it," Luke said. "And if the road is closed, the only way through the valley is through Crow's private land. He can charge what he wants, take what he wants." Grace sat down heavily. She looked sick. "We have to move," Luke repeated. "Now, before they decide to come check their work." Mari looked at the rope. She reached out and touched the severed end. Her hand trembled. Just once, before she made a fist. "All right," she said. Her voice was flat. "We go." The preparation was grim and hurried. They had 2 horses, Luke's roan and an old mare that belonged to the station. They had to choose what to take and what to leave behind. Grace Whitfield struggled the most. She had her valise open on the bench, staring at a stack of leather-bound books. "You cannot take them all," Mari said, hauling a sack of flour toward the door. "They are too heavy. I cannot leave them," Grace said. "They are all I have." Luke was checking his cinch. He watched Grace pick up a volume of poetry, her fingers tracing the gold lettering. He saw the letter tucked inside the cover. "You are running from something," Luke said. It was not a question. Grace stiffened. She looked at him, her eyes wide and wet. "I am going to my sister in San Francisco. You are running," Luke said again. He didn't say it unkindly. He said it like a man who recognized the gate. Grace slumped. The fight went out of her shoulders. "It was a lie," she whispered. "All of it." She looked at the books as if they were witnesses. "I was a teacher in Oakhaven. There was a man, young Mr. Stanton. His father owns the bank. He came to the schoolhouse one evening. He thought because I was unmarried, and because I lived alone in the teacher's cottage, that I was available." She took a shuddering breath. "I said no. I had to hit him with a ruler to make him stop. He went home and told his father I had enticed him, that I was a woman of loose morals who had tried to blackmail him." She looked up at Luke, tears spilling over. The town believed him. Of course they believed him. He is a Stanton. I was just the teacher from back east. They gave me one day to leave before the sheriff came to evict me. She touched the letter. My reference. The school board wrote a letter, recommending, "I seek employment elsewhere due to unsuitable character." It is a mark. I carry it because I am afraid to burn it. Luke looked at her. He saw the shame she carried, a shame that didn't belong to her but had been forced on her shoulders anyway. "Pack 2 books, Luke said. "Wrap them in the slicker. Leave the rest. Words weigh too much for where we are going." Grace nodded, wiping her face. She chose a Bible and a book of sonnets. She left the letter. On the other side of the room, Lin May was sewing a tear in the canvas saddlebag. She worked with a needle that moved like a silver flash. She didn't look at Grace, but her expression had softened. Luke walked over to her. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I can walk," Lin May said. "I walked from the coast to the mines. I can walk to a shack." She bit the thread and snapped it. She looked at the supplies she had packed. "It is not enough food," she said matter-of-factly. "We will be hungry by the 2nd day. Better hungry than dead." Luke said. Lin May looked at him. Her eyes were black and unyielding. "My husband died hungry." She said it was the first time she had mentioned him. "He worked on the rail line." Lin May continued. Her voice was devoid of self-pity. It was just a recitation of facts. There was a slide, rock and snow. He was buried for 2 days. When they dug him out, he was still breathing. His leg was crushed. The foreman said he was no use anymore. They would not waste medicine on a broken tool. She packed the needle away into a small cloth roll. He died 3 days later. The foreman charged me for the shovel they used to bury him. She looked up at Luke. Do not tell me about hunger. Cowboy, I know what authority does when no one is watching. Luke felt the weight of her stare. It was heavy, heavier than Grace's books. He nodded, a sharp dip of his chin. I am not the foreman. Luke said, No. Lin May said, You are not. But the gun on your hip speaks the same language. Luke touched the Colt Peacemaker holstered at his side. He slept with it. He ate with it. It was a part of him. A heavy, cold limb. I use it to keep the wolves off, he said. Wolf is just a dog that got hungry. Lin May said, She hoisted the saddlebag. I am ready. They were just dragging the last of the supplies onto the porch when the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the canyon walls. It wasn't a single rider this time. It was 4. Luke swore softly. Get back inside, he ordered. No, Mari said. She stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her trousers. If we hide, we look guilty. Luke looked at her. She was right, but he hated it. Stand behind me, he said. Do not speak unless they ask you a direct question, and even then, think twice. The riders emerged from the morning mist like apparitions. They were men built for rough work, wearing canvas dusters and hats pulled low. They rode good horses, well-fed and high-stepped. The leader was a man with a face like a hatchet, sharp nose, sharp chin, sharp eyes. He rode a big bay stallion. Luke recognized him. Jubal Early. He was Crow's foreman, a man who enjoyed his work a little too much. Jubal pulled his horse up 10 yards from the porch. The other 3 men fanned out, their hands resting casually near their waistbands. Morning, Jubal said. He didn't smile. His eyes flicked over Luke, dismissing him, then landed on Marie. Mr. Early, Marie said. Her voice was steady, but Luke saw her knuckles turn white where she gripped the doorframe. Heard you had some weather, Jubal said. Crow sent us down to check the bridge. It is gone, Luke said. Jubal's eyes snapped back to Luke. He looked him up and down, noting the worn gear, the way Luke stood with his weight balanced on the balls of his feet. I can see that. Friend, Jubal said. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. Who might you be? Name is Mercer. Passing through, passing through. Jubal repeated. Well, looks like you were stuck. He looked back at the women. He saw Lin May standing by the stack of supplies. He sneered. A curling of the lip that exposed yellow teeth. See, you got the laundry girl working hard, Jubal said. That is good. Those people get lazy if you don't keep an eye on them. Lin May did not flinch. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. And the schoolteacher? Jubal continued, nodding at Grace. Heard you had some trouble in town. Miss Shame, a pretty thing like you. Grace shrank back into the shadows of the doorway. Jubal turned his attention back to Mari. He leaned forward on his saddle horn. Boss is worried about you. Mari, he thinks a woman alone out here. It is not safe. He thinks maybe you should come back to the ranch. We can offer you protection. You can work off the rent you owe on this place. I do not owe rent, Mari said. We own the deed. Jubal laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. Everyone owes something. Mari, you know that? He nudged his horse forward a few steps. The animal's hooves squelched in the mud. Tell you what, Jubal said. We will take the ladies back with us. Mercer, you can find your own way. We have got plenty of room in the bunkhouse. We will make sure they are comfortable. One of the other men chuckled. It was a low, ugly sound. Luke stepped forward. He didn't move fast. He moved with a deliberation that drew every eye. He stepped off the porch and into the mud, placing himself between the horses and the women. The ladies are traveling with me, Luke said. Jubal stopped smiling. He looked at Luke, measuring him. You surely do not want to take on that burden. Friend, 3 women? In this country? That is a lot of mouths to feed. I will manage. Luke said. Jubal's hand drifted toward his gun belt. It wasn't a draw. Not yet. It was a suggestion. Crow is not going to like that, Jubal said softly. He likes to know where his neighbors are. Tell Crow the bridge is down, Luke said. Tell him the road is closed. Tell him we are heading for the pass. He kept his hands loose at his sides. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't have to. The way he stood, still as a post, eyes locked on Jubal's face, spoke louder than a threat. It said, I will die right here, but you will not leave this yard alive. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. The air felt electric. One twitch, one wrong word, and the yard would turn into a slaughterhouse. Jubal stared at Luke. He saw the scars on Luke's hands. He saw the lack of fear. Jubal was a bully, and like all bullies, he preferred easy targets. He calculated the odds, 4 against 1, but this one looked like he would take 2 with him before he hit the ground. Jubal sat back in his saddle. He gathered his reins. Have it your way. Mercer, Jubal said, but the pass is a long walk, lots of holes to fall into. He looked at Mari one last time. We will be seeing you. Mari, boss will want a full report. Jubal wheeled his horse around. Let us go, boys. The 4 men rode out, splashing through the creek shallows and disappearing up the canyon trail. Luke watched them go until they were out of sight. Only then did he let out a long breath. He turned back to the porch. Mari was staring at him. Her expression was a chaotic mix of relief and fury. You provoked him, she said. Her voice shook. I stopped him, Luke corrected. You made him angry, Mari snapped. She came down the steps, getting in Luke's face. Do you know what they do when they are angry? They come back at night. They burn things. They were already going to burn you, Luke said quietly. He gestures to the cigarette stubs. They were watching you. Mari. They were waiting for daylight to come take what they wanted. Mari stopped. She looked at the ground where Luke pointed. She saw the evidence. I did not want to need you, she whispered. The words were bitter. I hate that I needed you to stand there. Luke looked at her. He saw the pride that was holding her together, brittle as old iron. You did not need me, Luke said. You needed a witness. Now grab the water skins. We are losing daylight. The climb out of the canyon was brutal. The sun, having shaken off the storm clouds, returned with a vengeance. It beat down on the rocks until the heat radiated upward in waves. They walked in a line. Luke led the roan, which carried the heaviest packs. Mari led the station mare. Grace and Lin May walked in the middle. The mud dried into a concrete hard crust that sucked at their boots. Within an hour, the hem of Grace's dress was heavy with clay. She stumbled often, but she did not complain. She seemed terrified to make a sound, as if Jubal Early were still just behind the nearest boulder. They followed a deer trail that wound up the spine of the ridge. It was narrow and steep, flanked by prickly pear cactus and sharp yucca. By noon, the conversation had died completely. There was only the sound of heavy breathing and the scramble of hooves on loose shale. Luke kept his eyes moving. He watched the skyline. He watched the back trail. He watched the women. He saw Lin May offer Grace a hand over a fallen log, her grip firm. He saw Grace whisper a thank you, her face streaked with dust and sweat. He saw Mari walking with her head down, placing her feet with a grim determination, refusing to look back at the station that was shrinking to a speck in the distance. They stopped to rest in the shade of a twisted juniper tree. The water in the canteens was already warm. Luke checked Grace's feet. She was wearing thin leather boots meant for a schoolroom floor. Take them off, Luke said. Grace hesitated, then unlaced them. Her heels were raw. The skin rubbed away to weeping red flesh. Luke opened a tin of salve from his saddlebag. He didn't ask. He smeared the grease on her heels and wrapped them in strips of cloth he tore from an old shirt. It will ruin your shirt, Grace said weakly. Shirt was already done for, Luke said. Keep your laces loose. He looked up and caught Mari watching him. Her look was complicated, wary but with a flicker of something else. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. We need to make the ridge before dark, Luke said, standing up. The rattlesnakes come out onto the rocks to hold the heat when the sun goes down. Lin Mei stood up immediately. I do not like snakes, she said. Then walk in the middle, Luke said, and watch where you put your hands. They pushed on. The landscape grew harsher. The green of the canyon bottom gave way to the browns and grays of the high desert. It was a country of thorns and silence. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and orange, they found a sheltered ravine. It was a narrow cut in the rock, protected from the wind and hidden from the valley floor below. We camp here, Luke said. No fire. We eat cold beans. They ate in silence, huddled in their blankets as the temperature dropped. The desert night was sudden and cold. After the meal, Grace and Lin Mei curled up together near the rock wall, seeking warmth. They were asleep within minutes, exhaustion pulling them under. Luke took the first watch. He sat near the mouth of the ravine, his rifle across his knees. He heard soft footsteps. Mari came to sit beside him. She wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders. You think they are coming, she said. I know they are coming, Luke said. Men like Jubal do not like to be told no. Mari looked out at the darkening landscape. I was married for 5 years, she said softly, to a man named Josiah. He was kind, mostly, but he drank, and when he drank, he got small, and when he got small, he wanted to make me smaller so he could feel big. She touched the scar on her arm through her sleeve. I learned to be quiet. I learned to hide the knives. I learned that if I stood very still, sometimes the storm would pass. She turned to look at Luke. You do not stand still. Mercer, you step into the storm. I ran for a long time, Luke said. His voice was rough. I had a life before the war, before the drives. I saw things I didn't stop. I walked away from people who needed me because I wanted to stay clean. He looked at his hands, shadowy in the starlight. You do not stay clean. Mari, you just get dirty in different ways. I am scared. Too. Scared of Crow. Scared of who I have to be to stop him, Luke said. I put that man away. The man who hurts people. I don't want to let him out. Mari shifted. She was close enough that he could smell the scent of her. Sweat and sage and dust. It was a real smell. A human smell. I'm scared of wanting you to let him out, Mari whispered. She leaned in, just an inch, because if you fight them, you might win. And if you win, if you help us, I might start thinking that good things can happen. And that is dangerous? Luke asked. Hope is the most dangerous thing there is, Mari said. She looked at his mouth. Luke looked at hers. The air between them seemed to thicken. It wasn't the frantic, desperate energy of the morning. It was a slow, heavy pull. Luke leaned forward. He hesitated, giving her the space to pull back. She didn't. He brushed his lips against hers. It was a tentative, dry press of skin. A question. Mari made a small sound in her throat. She leaned into him, her hand coming up to touch his jaw. Her fingers were cold, but her mouth was warm. For a second, just one heartbeat, the fear dissolved. There was only the contact, the shared heat in a cold world. Then Luke pulled back. He did it gently, but he pulled back. If I start this, he whispered, his voice straining. I cannot watch the trail. Mari nodded slowly. She lowered her hand. You are right, she said. Watch the trail. Luke? She pulled her blanket tighter and moved back to where the other women slept. She lay down, but she didn't close her eyes. Luke turned back to the dark. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He gripped the rifle stock until his knuckles hurt. He watched the darkness for hours. Then, just as the moon began to slide behind the peaks, he saw it, far off, on the parallel ridge to the east. A silhouette broke the skyline. Then another, then two more. They were not moving like travelers. They were moving in a line, spread out, combing the ground. They weren't checking the bridge. They weren't patrolling the road. They were hunting. Luke felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He looked back at the sleeping women. Wake up, he whispered into the dark. They found us. The dark was not empty. It was filled with the sound of their own breathing, ragged and thin in the high elevation. and the clatter of loose shale sliding away under the horses' hooves. They moved before the sun had even thought about rising, navigating a landscape of jagged basalt and scrub brush that seemed designed to break ankles. Luke led the roan gelding. Mari led the station mare. They walked because the terrain was too steep to ride, and the animals were already blowing hard, their sides heaving like bellows. The air up here was thin and cold, biting at their lungs. Grace stumbled, falling to her knees on a patch of sharp gravel. She made a small, wet sound of pain, but scrambled up before Luke could turn around. She did not want to be the reason they stopped. She did not want to be the weak link. "Keep moving," Luke whispered. His voice was barely a ghost of sound. "We need to crest the saddle before the light hits the peaks." They pushed on. The silence of the high country was oppressive. It was a listening silence, the kind that made the snap of a twig sound like a gunshot. Every time a lizard skittered over a rock, heads snapped around. Then disaster struck with the sudden, dumb cruelty of the frontier. The station mare, laden with the bulk of their food and blankets, placed a hoof on a shelf of rock that looked solid but was rotten underneath. The stone gave way. The mare's leg plunged into a crevice, and her momentum carried her forward. There was a sickening, wet snap that vibrated through the ground. The mare screamed. It was a terrible, high-pitched shriek that echoed off the canyon walls, announcing their location to God and everyone else within 5 miles. Luke was there in a second, grabbing the mare's halter, forcing her head down to stifle the noise. But the damage was done. The horse was thrashing, her front leg bent at a ruined angle. Bone showed white through the dark hair. Mari dropped the lead rope, her hands flying to her mouth. She stared at the animal she had fed and brushed for 3 years. Luke looked at the leg, then at Mari. His face was hard, set in lines of grim necessity. "She is done," Luke said. "No," Mari whispered. She stepped forward, reaching for the mare's neck. "We can splint it. We can... She is done. Mari," Luke said again. He didn't raise his voice, but the finality of it stopped her cold. "She cannot walk. We cannot drag her, and we cannot leave her here to starve or be eaten by wolves while she is still alive." He reached for the knife at his belt. He could not use his gun. The shot would carry too far. Grace turned away, burying her face in Lin May's shoulder. Lin May did not look away. She watched, her face pale but composed, as if she were cataloging this loss along with all the others. "Take what you can carry," Luke ordered. "We have 2 minutes." They stripped the saddlebags. They had to leave the heavy canvas tent. They had to leave the extra sack of flour. They had to leave the cast iron skillet. They took the jerky, the beans, the ammunition, and the water. Luke led the mare a few yards away, behind a cluster of boulders. He spoke to her softly and low. Then there was a brief struggle, a heavy thud, and silence. Luke returned, wiping his blade on his pant leg. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. "We ration the water starting now," he said. "Half a cup a day." They walked on, leaving the dead mare and half their hope behind them. The sun crested the ridge, illuminating the world in an unforgiving glare. They were exposed, tiny specks moving across a vast anvil of stone. The loss of the horse changed the rhythm of their escape. They were slower now, burdened by the weight of the packs they had to carry themselves. The physical strain peeled back the layers of their defenses, leaving their minds raw. As the morning wore on, the silence broke. Not with a noise, but with confession. They had stopped to rest in the sliver of shade cast by a sandstone overhang. Mari was rubbing her shoulder where the pack strap had cut into her skin. She looked out at the shimmering horizon, her eyes distant. "I know why you are afraid of them," Mari said. She wasn't looking at Luke, but he knew she was speaking to him. Luke uncorked a canteen and passed it to her. "Drink." She took a small sip and handed it back. "Jubal early," she said. "He came to the station 6 months ago, before the rains. He had 2 men with him. They did not want food. They wanted to be entertained." Grace looked up from her book, her eyes wide. "They locked me in the storeroom," Mari said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the trembling that should have been there. "They drank my whiskey. They broke the jars of peaches I had put up for winter. And then they told me that if I made a sound, if I screamed, they would burn the roof down over my head." She looked at her hands. "I did not scream. I let them take the whiskey. I let them put their hands on me to search for money they knew I did not have. I stood there, and I looked at the wall, and I made myself stone. Because I knew that if I fought, I would be dead, and the station would be ash." She looked at Luke then, her eyes fierce and wet. "That is what shame is. Mercer, it is not what they do to you. It is the silence you keep afterward so you can survive. It is braiding the rage together with the fear until you cannot tell them apart." Grace closed her book. She set it down on the dirt. "I went to the sheriff," Grace said softly. Her voice was thin, like paper. "After the Stanton boy lied about me, I went to the sheriff's office. I wore my best dress. I thought the law was a real thing, like gravity." She laughed, a bitter, brittle sound. "The sheriff did not even write it down. He leaned back in his chair and asked me what I had done to give the boy the wrong idea. He asked if I had worn my hair loose. He asked if I had smiled too much. And then he laughed. He told me I should be flattered a Stanton noticed me at all." She picked up a small stone and threw it hard against the canyon wall. "I have nightmares," she whispered. "Not of the boy, but of the laughter. Of standing in that room, telling the truth, and being looked at like I was a liar. Lynn May was checking the stitching on her boots. She didn't stop working, but she spoke. In the camp, she said, if a worker died, they sent a letter to San Francisco asking for another one. Just a number on a paper. One falls, another comes. We are disposable." She looked at Grace. "You think the law failed you because you are a woman. It failed you because you are not them. I learned this when I came off the boat. You endure. You keep your head down. You work until your hands bleed. But you never, ever expect them to care. Endurance is the only revenge we get, but it costs. It eats you from the inside until you are hollow." Luke listened to them. He felt a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with the altitude. He wanted to promise them justice. He wanted to tell them that he would ride into town and make it right. But he knew the West. He knew that justice here was often just a word people used to justify a hanging. "I want to stop him," Luke said. He was looking at the horizon, searching for dust. "But I do not want to lead you into a massacre. If we fight Crow, we have to win, because if we lose, there is no jail cell waiting. There is just a rope and a tree." He stood up, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "And I am terrified that I am leading you into a trap I cannot shoot our way out of." They moved on. By mid-afternoon, the heat was a physical hammer. They found the traveler in a dry wash about 3 miles from the summit. He was a prospector, or had been. He was sitting against a rock, his legs swollen to the size of a log, black with gangrene. He had been there for days. His eyes were glazed, buzzing with flies he was too weak to swat away. He looked at them without recognition. Water. He croaked. Luke knelt beside him. He lifted the canteen to the man's cracked lips. The man drank greedily, water spilling down his dusty beard. "Thank you," the man whispered. "Help me up." Luke looked at the leg. He looked at the man's eyes, which were already seeing the other side. "We cannot move you, friend," Luke said gently. The man gripped Luke's wrist with surprising strength. "Do not leave me. The coyotes. They come close at night." Luke looked back at the women. They were exhausted, their own supplies critically low. Carrying a dying man was impossible. Staying with him meant waiting for him to die, which could take hours or days. And the dust cloud on the horizon was getting closer. The wilderness was indifferent. It did not care about mercy. Mercy was a luxury that cost time they did not have. "We can leave you water," Luke said. "And a gun." The man stared at him. Then he nodded slowly. He understood. Luke left a canteen and a small pistol with 2 rounds in it. He placed them in the man's lap. "Go," the man said. They walked away. They didn't look back. 10 minutes later, a single shot echoed through the canyon. No one spoke. They just kept walking, the sound driving them faster. They made the ridge line an hour before sunset. Luke crawled to the edge and looked back. Crow's riders were closer. He could count 6 of them now. They were moving efficiently. Tracking the prints the group had left. They would be at the wash in an hour. "We have to lose them," Luke said. He led the women into a field of loose scree. Sharp, broken rocks that held no footprints. It was treacherous walking. Every step threatened to twist an ankle. They moved laterally, cutting across the face of the mountain, aiming for a cluster of pines that marked the timberline. Luke stayed at the rear, using a branch of sagebrush to sweep away the few disturbances they made. It was a desperate, meticulous game of hide and seek. They reached the timberline as the sun vanished. The darkness under the trees was absolute. The line shack was half a mile further, tucked into a fold of the mountain where the wind howled like a banshee. It was barely a building. It was a lean-to of rotting logs and sod, abandoned by a shepherd years ago. The door was hanging by one hinge. Inside, it smelled of rat droppings and ancient dust. The stove was rusted through. Useless, but it had 3 walls and a roof. They collapsed inside. There was no energy left for talking. They huddled together in the corner, wrapping themselves in the few blankets they had. Mari sat apart, near the broken door. She was staring at the floor. Luke walked over to her. He sat down, his back against the logs. "Mari?" he said. She didn't answer at first. Then, her shoulders began to shake. It started as a tremor and grew into a shuddering sob that she tried to stifle with her hands. "It is not enough," she gasped. She looked up at him, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "We are just running. We are eating dust and leaving people to die and sleeping in rat holes. And for what? No one is coming. Luke, no one is coming to save us." She hit her fist against her thigh. "I built a life. I had a roof. I had a stove that worked. And now I am here, shivering in the dirt. And I am so tired of being strong. I am so tired of holding it all up." Luke didn't tell her it would be all right. He didn't offer false hope. He reached out and took her hand. "You do not have to hold it up right now," he said. "Put it down. Mari, let it fall." She looked at him, surprised by the permission. She crumbled. She leaned into him, burying her face in his coat. She cried the way a person cries when they have reached the absolute end of their endurance. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Luke held her. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders and just held on. He let her be broken. He let her be human. He didn't try to fix it. He just offered himself as a post to lean on. Slowly, the sobbing subsided. The wind whistled through the gaps in the logs. Grace and Lin May were asleep in the far corner, exhausted. Mari pulled back slightly, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be," Luke said. He looked at her in the dim light. She looked wrecked. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. Her face was swollen. Her lips chapped. And he had never wanted anything more in his life. "I am not drawn to you because you are broken, Mari," Luke said. His voice was rough with honesty. "I have seen plenty of broken people. I am one of them." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I am drawn to you because you refuse to lie about the pain. You stand in the middle of the fire and you say this burns. Most people spend their whole lives pretending they aren't on fire." Mari looked at him. Her eyes searched his face. "I want you," she whispered. The admission hung in the cold air. Luke went still. "And that terrifies me," she continued, "because wanting has always led to losing. If I want you, and you die, or you leave, I do not think I can survive the hole you would leave behind. We are here now," Luke said. "We are alive tonight. That is all we have." He leaned in. This time, she met him halfway. The kiss was not tentative. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and dust and fear. It was a claiming. They moved together into the shadows of the corner, away from the door. They wrapped themselves in a shared blanket, creating a small, warm world in the middle of the freezing night. There were no flowery words. There was only the sound of whispered names and the friction of skin against skin. Hands that had been clenched into fists all day finally opened. Luke touched the scars on her arm with a reverence that made her shiver. Mari traced the line of his jaw, grounding herself in the reality of his presence. It was an act of defiance against the cold, against Crow, against the death waiting in the canyon. It was the relief of being wanted not for what you could do, or what you could endure, but simply for who you were. When they finally slept, limbs tangled together, it felt like both a victory and a surrender. The morning brought no mercy, only a pale, watery light and the need to move. They woke stiff and sore. The intimacy of the night before hung between Luke and Marie, a softness in their eyes, a lingering touch as they packed the gear, but the danger was still waiting outside. "We circle east," Luke said. "There is a settlement called Black Creek. It is a mining camp, but there is a store. We need food." They walked for 6 hours, descending from the high country into a valley scarred by hydraulic mining. The earth here looked chewed up, raw red clay exposed like flesh. Black Creek was a collection of tents and shacks clustered around a muddy main street. It smelled of sulfur and unwashed men. They walked into town, a ragged parade. Luke walked point, his hand near his gun. Mari, Grace, and Lin May followed, heads high but eyes wary. They expected curiosity. They expected suspicion. But they were not prepared for the wall of hostility that met them. They went to the mercantile first. The shopkeeper, a man with a stained apron and eyes like flint, watched them enter. "We need beans, flour, and coffee," Luke said. He placed a gold coin on the counter, his last one. The shopkeeper looked at the coin, then at the women. "We are out of stock," the man said. Luke looked at the shelves behind him. They were full. "I see beans right there," Luke said. "Reserved." The man said, "For regular customers." He looked at Lin May. "We do not serve her kind here anyway. Bad for business." Lin May stiffened, but she said nothing. She was used to this. The man looked at Grace. "And we do not serve women who run off from their debts. Word travels. Miss—" Grace gasped. "How do you know?" "Ryder came through this morning," the shopkeeper said. "Said to watch out for a group of thieves. Said a cowboy had kidnapped 3 women and was dragging them to the border." He looked at Luke with open contempt. "You are the kidnapper." "I reckon—" Luke's hand twitched toward his gun. The injustice of it burned in his throat like bile. He wasn't a hero here. He was a villain, and these people, these decent folks, were happy to believe the lie because it was exciting. "I am not a kidnapper," Luke said through gritted teeth. "These women are free. Does not look like it to me." A voice came from the doorway. 3 men stood there, miners, by the look of them, rough, dirty, and bored. They were looking at Mari with eyes that made Luke want to kill. "Looks like you are hoarding the goods, Cowboy," one of the miners leered. Luke stepped between the men and the women. "We are leaving," he said. He grabbed the coin from the counter. He ushered the women out, backing through the door. They walked down the street, feeling the eyes of the town on them. Women pulled their children close as they passed. Men spat in the dirt. "Whore," someone whispered as Mari passed. She didn't look. She kept walking, her chin up. But Luke saw the flinch. They reached the edge of town, near the livery stable. A piece of paper was nailed to a post. It was a wanted poster, not for a bandit, but for information. Information wanted. It read, "Regarding the death of Sarah Miller. Last seen on the Canyon Road." Grace stopped. She stared at the name. Sarah Miller. She whispered, "That was the girl before me. The teacher." She looked at the date. 6 months ago. She didn't move away. Grace said, "They said she moved away." Luke tore the poster down. He looked at it. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. "Contact sheriff regarding whereabouts. Reward." "It is a trap," Mari said. She was reading over his shoulder. "The sheriff is Crow's man. If you go to him with information, you disappear," Luke finished. He looked at the 3 women. They were dirty, starving, and exhausted. They had been hunted, insulted, and rejected. But as they stood there, looking at the paper that proved a murder, something changed. The fear that had been driving them shifted into something colder, harder. "We cannot run," Grace said. Her voice was steady for the first time in days. If we run, Sarah Miller stays dead and no one knows why, and Crow keeps doing it, Lin May added. Luke looked at them. He saw the steel in their spines. If we go back to the county seat, Luke said, we are walking into the lion's den. They will try to kill us before we get to the judge. Then let them try, Mari said. She took Luke's hand. She squeezed it. Hard. I am done running. Luke, I am done being silent. Luke looked at the poster, then at the road leading south. It was the dangerous road, the hard road. All right, Luke said. We do not disappear. We make so much noise they cannot bury us. He crumpled the poster and shoved it into his pocket. Let us go find a judge, he said. They turned their backs on the safety of the wilderness and started walking toward the fight. The road to the county seat was not a road at all. It was a series of dry washes, deer trails, and shadowed draws where the sun barely touched the ground. They moved like ghosts, or fugitives, which in the eyes of the law were becoming the same thing. For 3 days, they traveled under a strain that felt like a wire pulled tight across their chests. Every hawk circling in the thermal updrafts looked like a scout. Every shift of wind that rattled the sagebrush sounded like a horse's bit jingling. They slept in shifts, never lighting a fire, eating cold beans and hardtack that tasted of dust and despair. Luke Mercer rode point, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon line. He was looking for the telltale silhouettes of riders, but he was also looking for something else, a reason to believe they were not walking into a grave. They needed an ally. Luke knew the layout of the county from his days driving cattle, and he knew the men who held power. Most were bought. Silas Crow's money was a river that watered many fields, but there were names whispered in bunkhouses, names of men who had refused to drink from that river. We are looking for Elias Thorne, Luke told the women during a brief rest in a grove of stunted junipers. He used to be a marshal before the territory was carved up. He lives on a homestead 10 miles south of the seat. If there is any law left in this dirt, it lives in his house. Mari Delgado sat on a flat rock, stitching a tear in her trouser leg. She did not look up. And if he is not the man you remember, then we keep moving, Luke said. But they all knew they could not keep moving forever. They were running out of food, running out of strength, and running out of time. They were not just fleeing anymore. They were building a weapon. That evening, huddled in a depression in the earth that hid them from the road, they took stock of what they carried. It was a meager arsenal, made of paper and memory. Mari reached into the lining of her heavy coat. She had ripped the seam open with a pocket knife. From the wool padding, she pulled out a small, black book. It was a ledger, its pages warped by dampness, but the ink still black and damning. I kept 2 books, Mari said, smoothing the cover with a hand that trembled slightly. One for the taxman, and one for the truth. This shows every toll Crow's men collected. It shows the extra fees they charged women to pass safely. It shows the payments made to the sheriff for road security that never happened. She opened to a page near the back. And here, this is where the entries stop for 3 days. The days Sarah Miller went missing. Grace Whitfield reached into her valise. She pulled out the Bible she had saved, and from between the pages of Lamentations, she slid a folded letter. It was written on expensive stationery, the kind used by bankers. It is from the elder Mr. Stanton, Grace said. Her voice was steady, though her face was pale in the twilight. He wrote it to me after I refused his son. He said that if I did not leave town quietly, he would ensure I never taught in this territory again. He said that a woman's reputation is a glass vase, easy to break and impossible to fix. She looked at Luke. It proves malice. It proves they destroy anyone who says no to them. Lin May sat with her arms wrapped around her knees. She had no paper. She had no ledger. I have names, Lin May said softly. At the rail camp, the foreman kept a list of the men who died. He called it the waste log. When Crow's men came to take the timber for the bridge repairs, timber meant for the workers' housing. The foreman gave it to them. My husband tried to speak. He said the winter was coming. Lin May's eyes were dry and hard as obsidian. Crow's man, the one with the silver tooth. He pistol-whipped him. He said a Chinaman does not need a roof. He needs a grave. I remember the date. I remember the face. I remember where they dumped the timber they did not use, just to show they could take it. Luke looked at them. 3 women, battered by the elements, holding the pieces of a puzzle that revealed a rot deep in the heart of the county. It is enough, Luke said. If we can get a judge to look at it. If we can get a judge to listen before he looks at the wanted posters. But the journey to find a judge meant crossing through civilization, and civilization was proving to be crueler than the wilderness. The next day, they were forced to stop at a small trading post near the crossroads. They needed water, and the horses were stumbling from dehydration. The post was a rough affair, a sod building with a corral out back. A few men loitered on the porch, passing a bottle of whiskey between them. They went quiet when the group approached. Luke kept his hand near his hip, his gait slow and deliberate. "Stay close," he murmured to the women. He tied the horses to the rail. He could feel the eyes on them. It was a physical sensation, like ants crawling on his skin. The women walked toward the water trough to fill the canteens. Mari kept her head high, staring straight ahead. Grace looked at the ground. Lin May walked with a blank face, a shield she had forged over years of survival. One of the men on the porch, a thick-necked drifter with a week of beard growth, stood up. He walked to the edge of the porch, putting himself between the women and the trough. He looked at Lin May. He cleared his throat with a loud, wet rasp and spat. A glob of brown tobacco juice landed on the toe of Lin May's boot. "Oops," the man said. He grinned at his friends. "Did not see you there. You people are hard to see, blending in with the dirt like that." Lin May stopped. She did not look at her boot. She looked at the man. Luke was there in a heartbeat. The distance between the hitching rail and the porch vanished. He didn't draw his gun. He grabbed the man by the lapels of his duster and slammed him back against the sod wall. The impact knocked the wind out of the man with a grunt. Luke's face was inches from the man's nose. The rage that surged up in him was white-hot and terrifying. It wasn't the calculated violence of a gunfighter. It was the raw, jagged anger of a man who was tired of seeing the weak preyed upon. "You apologize," Luke hissed. The man's eyes went wide. He smelled the danger on Luke, the scent of a man who had crossed a line and wasn't sure he wanted to come back. Luke's hand tightened. He felt the fabric of the duster tear. He wanted to hit him. He wanted to break his jaw. He wanted to hurt him for every insult, every sneer, every door that had been closed in their faces for the last 4 days. "Hey!" the store owner shouted from the doorway, leveling a shotgun. "Let him go, Cowboy! We do not want trouble here." Luke froze. He heard the click of the shotgun hammer. He looked at the man pinned against the wall. He looked at Lin May, who was watching him with a strange expression. Not fear of the man, but fear of Luke. Luke let go. He stepped back, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Get your water," Luke said to the women. His voice was a stranger's voice. He turned and walked back to the horses, keeping his back to the shotgun. He felt sick. He had almost lost it. He had almost become the thing he despised, a man who used force to silence the world. They rode away in silence. The shame of the encounter hung over them like a cloud. That night, they camped in a box canyon, miles from the road. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky. Luke sat apart from the group, cleaning his gun. He did it by feel, stripping the cylinder, wiping the springs. It was a ritual to calm his hands. He heard footsteps in the gravel. "Mari." She sat down beside him. She didn't speak for a long time. She just watched his hands work. "You wanted to kill him," Mari said. "I wanted to make him stop," Luke said. "It is the same thing. Sometimes," she said. Luke slotted the cylinder back into the frame. It clicked into place. "I am trying to keep us safe, Mari, but I feel like I am turning into a dog that bites at everything that moves. I am scaring myself." Mari reached out. She placed her hand over his, stopping his restless movement. "You are not him," she said. She didn't have to say Crow's name. Luke looked at her. In the moonlight, her face was softened. The lines of exhaustion smoothed away. "How do you know?" Luke asked. Because you let go. Mari said, Crow never lets go. She moved her hand from his gun hand to his arm, then up to his shoulder. It was a deliberate movement, a choice. She had spent years flinching. She had spent years making herself small, hiding her body under layers of fabric and silence. But tonight, she was not hiding. I do not want to talk about them, Mari whispered. I do not want to talk about the ledger, or the road, or the men who hate us. What do you want? Luke asked. His voice was rough. I want to feel like I'm a person, Mari said. Not a victim, not a witness, just a woman. She leaned forward. She pressed her forehead against his. Luke stopped breathing. He was acutely aware of her fragility, and his own capacity for violence. He was terrified of breaking her. Mari, he breathed. She silenced him with a kiss. It wasn't fierce like the one in the line shack. It was slow. It was a question asked and answered in the same breath. She pulled back an inch. Her dark eyes searched his. Is this all right? She asked. Luke nodded. Yes. He reached out and touched her face. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. His hands, so quick to violence that afternoon, were now clumsy with tenderness. He unbuttoned the top button of her heavy coat. He paused, his hand hovering, waiting for a sign to stop. Mari took a breath. She didn't freeze. She didn't look away. She nodded. He slid the coat from her shoulders. Underneath, she wore the rough work shirt, but in the dark, it felt like silk. He pulled her close. There was a desperation in the way they held each other, a need to affirm life in the face of so much death. But there was also a profound carefulness. When Luke kissed her neck, he felt her pulse hammering. He stopped. Scared? He whispered against her skin. Yes, she admitted. But do not stop. Make me forget why. They lay back on the bedroll. The ground was hard. The air was cold. But the heat between them was a living thing. It was a clumsy, beautiful fumbling in the dark, whispered reassurances, the friction of denim, the warmth of skin. At one point, Mari went still, a memory, perhaps, or a flash of old fear. Luke stopped instantly. He lifted his weight off her. He waited. He didn't push. He didn't ask. He just waited, his breathing ragged. Mari let out a long exhale. She reached up and pulled him back down. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For waiting. That night, for a few hours, the war outside ceased to exist. There was only the small, sovereign territory of the blanket, where they were not fugitives, but simply two people trying to keep the cold away. The next morning, the reality of their situation returned with the sun. They reached Elias Thorne's homestead by midday. It was a modest ranch tucked into a valley of yellow grass. A windmill creaked lazily in the breeze. Luke rode up to the gate, waving a white handkerchief. A man came out onto the porch. He was older, with a shock of white hair and a limp that spoke of old bullet wounds. Luke Mercer, the man called out. It is me. Elias, Luke shouted back. Thorne lowered the rifle he was holding. He waved them in. They rode into the yard. Thorne looked tired. His face was gray, his eyes shifting nervously to the hills surrounding the ranch. Get down, Thorne said, ushering them toward the barn. Put the horses inside. You should not be out in the open. They dismounted. Thorne looked at the women. He took his hat off for Marie and Grace, a reflex of old manners that seemed out of place. I heard you were in trouble, Luke, Thorne said as they entered the dim coolness of the barn. But I did not think it was this bad. The sheriff has a $500 bounty on your head. Says you are a mad dog. It is a lie. Luke said, We have proof. Elias, we have a ledger. We have testimony. We just need to get to a judge without getting shot. Thorne nodded. He was wringing his hat in his hands. A judge. Yes, Judge Holloway's in the county seat. He sits tomorrow. Will you help us? Grace asked. Her voice was hopeful. You were a marshal. People respect you. Thorne looked at Grace. He looked at her innocent, desperate face. His eyes filled with a sudden, terrible water. I was a marshal, Thorne said softly. Now I am just an old man with a daughter who lives in town, a daughter who is married to one of the sheriff's deputies." Luke went cold. He took a step back, his hand dropping to his gun. "Elias?" Luke said. Thorne closed his eyes. "They came to me yesterday. Luke, they said if you showed up, and I did not hold you, they said my daughter would have an accident. A fire!" The sound of horses erupted outside. Not one or two, but a dozen. The barn doors at the far end burst open. Sunlight flooded in, blinding them. "Silas Crow's men, run!" Luke roared. He shoved Mari and Grace toward a side door, half hidden by hay bales. He spun around, drawing his Colt, and fired 2 shots at the silhouette in the main doorway. The shots went wild, kicking up dust, but they forced the attackers to scatter. Thorne stood in the middle of the barn, weeping. "I am sorry. Luke, I am sorry." Luke didn't look at him. He grabbed Lynn May by the arm and dragged her toward the side door. They burst out into the sunlight. They were on the backside of the barn, facing a steep slope of scrub oak and granite boulders. "Up the slope!" Luke yelled. Bullets slapped into the wood of the barn inches from his head. Splinters sprayed his cheek. They scrambled up the hill. It was a nightmare of noise and confusion. Men were shouting, horses were screaming, and the crack of repeating rifles filled the air. Grace was lagging behind. Her dress caught on a thorn bush. She cried out, tugging frantically at the fabric. A rider came around the corner of the barn, a man with a red scarf over his face. He spurred his horse toward Grace, leaning down to grab her. He wasn't shooting. He was trying to take her alive. "Grace!" Mari screamed. Mari didn't run. She turned back. She picked up a rock the size of a cantaloupe and hurled it. It struck the rider's horse on the nose. The horse reared, flailing its hooves. The rider lost his grip on Grace's arm. Luke spun around. He leveled his peacemaker. He took a breath. Finding the stillness in the center of the chaos, he fired. The rider's hat flew off. The man yelped, clutching his ear, and wheeled his horse around, retreating behind the barn. "Move!" Luke screamed. He grabbed Grace by the waist and practically threw her up the next ledge of rock. Lynn May was there, pulling her up. Mari was shoving from behind. They scrambled into the dense cover of the scrub oak. The horses couldn't follow them there. They ran until their lungs burned like fire. They didn't stop until they were 2 miles away, hidden in a cleft of rock high above the valley floor. They collapsed, gasping for air. Grace was shaking so hard her teeth clattered. Her sleeve was torn, her arm bleeding from the rider's grip. Mari crawled over to her. She wrapped her arms around Grace. "I have you," she said fiercely. "I have you." Grace looked at Mari. She looked at Lynn May, who was watching the back trail with a rock in her hand. She looked at Luke, who was reloading his gun with bloody fingers. "You came back," Grace whispered. "You could have run. We do not leave family behind," Mari said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. They weren't strangers anymore. The storm, the hunger, and now the violence had forged them into something singular. They were a family of outcasts. Maybe, but a family. Luke snapped the loading gate shut. "Thorne sold us," Luke said grimly. "He had no choice," Lynn May said. She was staring at the distant ranch. "They used his blood against him. That is how they work." "We cannot trust anyone," Mari said. "We have to trust someone," Luke said, "or we die in these hills. But we are done asking for help. Now we demand it." They reached the outskirts of the county seat, Oakhaven. 2 days later, they looked like scarecrows. Their clothes were rags. They were gaunt, their eyes hollowed out by sleeplessness. They left the high ground and entered the town from the north, moving through the alleys behind the saloons and the livery stables. The town was buzzing. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation. They crouched behind a stack of crates in an alleyway. Across the street, the sheriff's office stood like a fortress. A crowd was gathered around a notice board. Luke squinted. He could see the bold print on the fresh posters. Wanted dead or alive. Luke Mercer, kidnapper, murderer. And below that, accomplices, the fallen women of the canyon. Wanted for theft and conspiracy. They framed us, Grace whispered. She sounded numb. They made us the monsters. Look, Lin May said. She pointed to a man standing on a crate in front of the crowd. It was the sheriff. He was a big man with a star that shone too brightly. These women are not victims, the sheriff bellowed. They are whores who lured good men to their deaths. They are in league with this drifter to rob our citizens. They are a cancer, and we must cut them out. The crowd murmured in agreement. It was the sound of a mob finding its permission. Mari closed her eyes. It is over, she said. They own the story. Even if we show the ledger, who will believe a whore and a thief over the sheriff? Luke looked at the sheriff. Then he looked down the street. There was a small building with a sign that creaked in the wind. The Oak Haven Gazette. The windows were dirty, but inside, a lamp was burning. The law is deaf, Luke said. He turned to the women. But maybe the press is just hungry. What do you mean? Mari asked. Sheriff controls the court, Luke said. But he does not control the printing press. If we can get this story into ink, if we can get it on paper before they hang us, then the town has to read it. It is a death sentence if we are caught in there, Lin May said. It is a death sentence out here, Luke countered. He looked at them. Do we hide, or do we burn it down? Mari looked at the ledger in her hand. She thought of the silence she had kept for years. She thought of the fear. Burn it down. She said, they moved across the street. They didn't run. They walked. They walked right through the open back door of the newspaper office. The room smelled of ink and stale tobacco. A man was hunched over a typesetting desk. He wore a visor and had ink stains up to his elbows. He looked up, startled. He saw a cowboy with a gun in his hand and 3 women who looked like furies risen from the earth. I am Hiram Peel. The man squeaked. Take the money in the box. Just do not shoot the press. We do not want your money, Luke said. He holstered his gun. He stepped aside. Mari stepped forward. She slammed the black ledger down onto the desk. It made a heavy, decisive sound. We have a story, Mr. Peel, Mari said, and you are going to print it. Peel looked at the ledger. He looked at the women. He saw the bruises. He saw the letter Grace held out. He saw the fire in Lin May's eyes. He was a man who hated Silas Crow. He was a man who had been waiting 20 years for a story that mattered. He adjusted his spectacles. Lock the door, Peel said quietly, and tell me everything. Outside, the mob roared. Inside, the first sentence of the truth was being said in lead. The hearing was held in the back room of the Oak Haven courthouse, a space that smelled of wet wool, stale tobacco, and the sour sweat of men packed too close together. Outside, the sky was a flat, bruised purple, threatening rain, but inside the air was hot and still. Judge Holloway sat behind a scarred oak table. He was a man worn thin by the territory, his face a map of deep lines, and he looked at the gathered crowd with weary eyes. He was an honest man, but honesty in Oak Haven was a candle burning in a gale. Silas Crow sat in the front row. He did not look like a man on trial. He looked like a man attending a board meeting for a company he owned. He wore a charcoal suit, immaculate despite the dust outside, and he cleaned his fingernails with a small penknife, ignoring the proceedings. The sheriff stood by the door, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol, his eyes scanning the room with a proprietary glare. Luke sat at a small table to the left, his hands resting on his knees. He had been disarmed at the door. The absence of his gun made him feel naked, unbalanced. Beside him sat Mari, Grace, and Lin May. They sat straight, their spines stiffened by a fear they refused to show. The prosecutor was a man named Gable, a weasel with a slicked-back mane of oil-black hair who owed his position to Crow's patronage. Your Honor, Gable began, strutting before the judge, we are here to address the disturbances caused by these transients. They are accused of theft, of public disorder, and of slander against one of our most upstanding citizens. He gestured to Crow, who did not look up. This is not a trial, Holloway rumbled. This is a preliminary hearing to see if there is enough evidence to hold them, whatever you call it. Judge, Gable sneered. It is a waste of time. These women are vagrants. And this man, he pointed a long finger at Luke, is a known drifter with a reputation for violence. Call your witnesses, Holloway said, cutting him off. Grace was the first to take the stand. She walked to the chair, her head held high, though Luke could see the tremor in her hands where she clasped them in her lap. State your name, Holloway said. Grace Whitfield. Gable approached her like a wolf circling a lamb. Miss Whitfield, you claim to be a schoolteacher, yet you left your last post in disgrace, did you not? I left because I was forced out, Grace said. Her voice was clear, but brittle. Forced out because of immoral conduct, Gable said loud enough for the back of the room to hear. Because you attempted to seduce a young man of good standing. That is a lie, Grace said. Is it? Gable leaned in. Invading her space, or is it a pattern? You run from one town, find yourself stranded at a way station, and suddenly you are making accusations against Mr. Crow. Perhaps you are looking for a payout. Perhaps this is just another scheme. Grace looked at the crowd. She saw the women whispering behind their hands. She saw the men smirking. She felt the old shame rising, the heat of it climbing her neck. It would be so easy to cry. It would be so easy to step down. I am not a schemer, Grace said. Each word cost her something visible. I am a witness. I saw the men close the road. I saw them threaten us. And I know what it looks like when powerful men decide a woman's truth is inconvenient. You can step down, Gable said dismissively, turning his back on her. Lynn May was next. As she walked to the chair, a ripple of laughter went through the room. Someone in the back shouted a slur regarding her eyes. The sheriff did not call for order. He smirked. Gable did not even look at her. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, surely we do not need to entertain this. The witness is not of a reliable demographic. She likely does not even understand the oath. I understand the oath, Lynn May said. Her voice was low, accented, and harder than iron. Gable looked at her with mock surprise. Oh, and what is the oath to you? It is a promise to speak what is true, Lynn May said, even to men who do not want to hear it. Gable laughed. And what truth can a washerwoman offer us? I worked the rail camp, Lynn May said. She looked directly at Crow. I saw the timber meant for our housing taken by this man's wagons. I saw my husband beaten when he tried to stop it. You treat us like we are part of the scenery, like trees or rocks. You think because you do not look at us, we do not see you. But we see. Gable slammed his hand on the table. This is irrelevant. We are talking about the bridge. It is all the same, Lynn May said. It is all taking what is not yours because you think you are a god. Sit down, Gable shouted. Then it was Mari's turn. She did not wait to be called. She stood up and walked to the chair. She sat down and fixed her eyes on Silas Crow. For the first time, Crow stopped cleaning his nails. He looked up. You run the way station, Gable said. A lonely place for a widow. You have visitors often? Men visitors? I run a business, Mari said. Her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a rage she was barely keeping on a leash. A business! Gable sneered. Is that what we are calling it? And did Mr. Crow refuse to pay for your services? Is that why we are here? Luke stood up. His chair scraped loud against the floor. Sit down. Mercer, the sheriff barked, his hand dropping to his gun. Luke remained standing. His eyes were on Gable. You ask her that again, and I will tear your tongue out. Crow smiled. It was a small, cold expression. See, Gable said to the room. Violent, unstable. Just as I said. Mari looked at Luke. Please, she said softly. Sit. Luke slowly lowered himself back into the chair. His muscles were coiled tight as springs. Mari turned back to Gable. You want to know about my business? I keep a ledger, every toll, every wagon. And for the last 6 months, your client's men have been taking a 50% cut of everything that crosses the bridge. Extortion? Gable laughed. Proof? The ledger is with the editor of the Gazette, Mari said, along with the dates that match the disappearance of Sarah Miller. The room went deadly quiet. The name Sarah Miller hung in the air like smoke. Objection, Gable screamed. This is hearsay. This is slander. Is it? Mari asked. She looked at the crowd. Sarah Miller drove a wagon across that bridge 6 months ago. She paid the toll. I wrote it down. She never reached Oak Haven. But Crow's foreman, Jubal Early, came back across the bridge 2 hours later driving her team. He said she sold it to him. She leaned forward. Sarah Miller was running from a man who beat her. She would have walked to California before she sold her horses. Crow stood up. His composure cracked. Just a fraction. This woman is hysterical. Sheriff, clear this room. The sheriff stepped forward. That is enough. Hearing is over. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel. I run this court. Sheriff, not you. The sheriff ignored him. He looked at Luke. He saw the danger in Luke's eyes, the way the town was starting to murmur. He needed to end this. You are under arrest. Mercer, the sheriff said. For what? Holloway demanded. Disturbing the peace. The sheriff said, and suspicion of murder? He moved toward Luke, pulling a pair of iron cuffs from his belt. The room teetered on the edge, the men in the back. Crow's hired hands and the drunk drifters started to surge forward. They smelled blood. They sensed that the law was dissolving, and in its place was the old, ugly rule of the mob. Get a rope, someone shouted. Save the county the cost of a trial. Luke stood up. He looked at the sheriff, then at the mob. He calculated the distance to the sheriff's gun. He could take him. He could break his arm, take the weapon, and hold the room. But then the shooting would start, and the women were in the line of fire. He hesitated. It was Mari who moved. She didn't move toward the door. She moved to the center of the room, placing herself between Luke and the mob. Stop! She screamed. Her voice was raw, tearing through the noise. It shocked them into a momentary silence. You want to hang him? Mari shouted. You want to hang him because he helped us? She turned to face the townspeople. She looked at the shopkeeper who had denied them beans. She looked at the women who had whispered. You call us whores, she said. You call us liars, because it is easier than looking at him. She pointed a shaking finger at Crow. You all know, she said. Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried to every corner. You know he owns the water. You know he owns the road, but you do not want to know what he takes when he thinks no one is watching. She took a breath. She reached up and unbuttoned her collar, pulling the fabric aside to reveal the faint, silver scars on her neck and collarbone. He came to my station, she said. Not his men. Him. He told me that a woman alone has no rights. He told me that if I wanted to keep my roof, I had to pay in something other than coin. Crow's face turned a violent, mottled red. Shut her up, he roared. I will not shut up, Mari yelled back. She was crying now, the tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. He hurt me, and he told me that if I spoke, he would burn me out. She looked at the women in the crowd. Sarah Miller spoke, and she is dead. I am speaking, and you want to kill the only man who stood between me and him? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a community being forced to look at its own rot. Suddenly, the back door of the courtroom burst open. Hiram Peel, the newspaper editor, stood there. He was out of breath, clutching a stack of fresh broadsheets, the ink still wet. Read it, Peel shouted, throwing the papers into the crowd. Read the ledger. It is all there. Men grabbed the papers. They read. They saw the dates. They saw the amounts. They saw the undeniable arithmetic of corruption. The mood in the room shifted. It didn't soften. It curdled. But the target changed. The eyes that had been fixed on Luke slid, one by one, toward Silas Crow. Crow saw it. He looked at the sheriff. The sheriff looked at the mob, then took a step away from Crow. Crow backed up. He reached into his coat. Gun! Luke shouted. He didn't wait. He launched himself over the table. Crow pulled a small derringer, but before he could level it, the world outside exploded. Boom! It wasn't a gunshot. It was thunder, so loud it shook the window panes in their frames. The sky opened up, dumping a deluge of rain that sounded like gravel hitting the roof. The lights in the courtroom flickered and died, plunging them into gray gloom. In the chaos, Crow fired. The shot went wild, shattering a water pitcher. Crow turned and bolted for the side door. "He is running!" Grace screamed. Luke scrambled to his feet. He grabbed the sheriff's gun from the holster of the stunned lawman. Ripping it free, he turned to Mari. She was standing amidst the overturned chairs, breathing hard. "Stay here," Luke ordered. "Stay with the judge." "No," Mari said. She reached out and grabbed his sleeve. Her grip was iron. Luke looked at her. The air between them was electric, charged with the storm and the violence. "If I do not come back," Luke started. "Do not say it," Mari hissed. Luke looked at the door where Crow had vanished. He looked back at her. "Then hold my hand," he said, "and make me promise." She grabbed his hand, her fingers interlaced with his, tight and desperate. "Promise me," she whispered. "I promise," Luke said. He pulled his hand free, the warmth of her touch lingering on his palm like a brand. He turned and ran into the storm. The street was a river. The rain was coming down in sheets so thick it was hard to breathe. The drainage ditches were overflowing, turning the dust of Oak Haven into a sucking quagmire of mud. Luke shielded his eyes. He saw a horse galloping south, toward the canyon. Crow was heading for the crossing. He was heading for the only way out of the county that didn't go through the town. He was going to try to cross where the bridge used to be. Luke spotted a horse tied to the rail, the sheriff's big gray. He didn't ask permission. He vaulted into the saddle and spurred the animal into a run. The chase was a blur of rain and adrenaline. They left the town behind, galloping into the teeth of the storm. The road was dissolving. Mud flew up in great clods, blinding them. Crow was desperate. He was whipping his horse, driving it without mercy. They reached the canyon rim. Below, the creek was a monster. It was higher than it had been the night the bridge fell. It was a brown torrent, roaring like a freight train, tearing trees from the banks and smashing them against the rocks. Crow reached the bank. The bridge was gone, but a single massive beam still spanned part of the gap, lodged against a pile of debris in the center of the channel. Crow dismounted. His horse balked, rearing up and throwing him. Crow scrambled in the mud. He looked back and saw Luke coming. He didn't surrender. He turned toward the water. He was going to try to cross on the debris dam. It was suicide. "Stop!" Luke screamed over the roar of the water. Crow didn't listen. He scrambled onto the wet timber. He was on his hands and knees, crawling over the slick wood, the water churning just inches below him. Luke bailed off the gray horse. He slid down the muddy bank, his boots digging deep furrows. "Crow! You cannot make it!" Crow looked back. His face was a mask of terror and hate. "I will not let you take me!" he screamed. The timber shifted. The water pushed against the debris dam, the pressure immense, with a sound like a gunshot. The log Crow was clinging to snapped free. Crow screamed as the wood twisted. He was thrown into the water. The current grabbed him instantly. Luke didn't think. The instinct that had made him cross the first time, the refusal to look away, kicked in. He threw the gun onto the bank. He dove. The cold was a physical blow. It punched the air from his lungs. Luke kicked hard, fighting the current. He saw Crow's head bobbing in the foam. 10 yards downstream, Luke swam. Debris struck his shoulder, numbing his arm, but he kept kicking. He reached Crow just as the older man was being pulled under by the weight of his sodden wool coat. Luke grabbed Crow's collar. Crow fought him. He thrashed, clawing at Luke's face, trying to climb on top of him to breathe. "Stop fighting!" Luke roared, swallowing water. He punched Crow, a short, sharp blow to the jaw. Crow went limp. Luke turned, kicking for the shore. The current was dragging them toward the narrows, where the water smashed against the canyon walls. If they hit that, they were dead. Luke saw a willow root sticking out of the bank. He lunged for it. His fingers slipped, then caught. The strain on his arm was agonizing. He felt his shoulder pop. He groaned, gritting his teeth. He hauled them in, inch by inch, fighting the entire weight of the river. He dragged Crow onto the mud. Luke collapsed, gasping, vomiting water. He lay there for a long time, the rain beating against his back. He rolled over, Crow was lying on his back. His eyes were open, staring at the storm. His chest was not moving. Luke crawled over to him. He checked for a pulse. There was none. The river, or the blow, or the fear had stopped his heart. Luke sat back on his heels. He looked at the dead man. There was no triumph. There was no glory. There was just a wet, muddy body in the rain. Crow had escaped the law, but he hadn't escaped the land. The bridge he had neglected, the river he had tried to own. They had taken him in the end. Luke closed Crow's eyes. He is done. Luke whispered to the rain. The ride back to town was slow. Luke draped Crow's body over the sheriff's horse and walked beside it. He was limping. His shoulder was on fire. When he reached the edge of town, the storm was breaking. The clouds were tearing apart, revealing a sky of bruised violet. The sheriff met him at the edge of Main Street. He had a posse with him: Holloway, Thorne, and a dozen armed citizens. They stopped when they saw Luke. They saw the body on the horse. The sheriff looked at Crow. He looked at Luke. He saw the end of his patronage, the end of his protection. He looked at the men behind him and saw that his time was over. He lowered his gun. Judge Holloway stepped forward. He looked at the body. "Is this your work, Mercer?" Holloway asked. "The river took him," Luke said. His voice was a rasp. "I tried to pull him out." Holloway nodded. He looked at the sheriff. "Take the body to the undertaker, and then turn in your badge." "Sheriff, we have a lot of statements to take." Luke walked past them. He didn't care about the sheriff. He didn't care about the town. He walked to the hotel where they had taken the women. He climbed the stairs. He pushed open the door to room 4. Marie was sitting on the edge of the bed. She was still wearing her muddy clothes. Grace and Lynn May were asleep in chairs, exhausted. Marie looked up. She saw Luke standing in the doorway, soaked, muddy, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead, his arm hanging uselessly at his side. She stood up. She didn't say a word. She went to the wash basin. She poured water from the pitcher. She took a clean cloth. She walked over to him. Luke stood there, swaying slightly. "I came back," he whispered. "I know," Marie said. She took his good hand. She began to wipe the mud and the blood away. She did it slowly, methodically. She cleaned his knuckles. She cleaned his palms. Her hands were shaking. Luke's hands were shaking. She moved to his face. She wiped the blood from his forehead. She was crying silently, the tears mixing with the water on the cloth. She dropped the cloth. She pressed her forehead against his. She gripped the lapels of his sodden coat. Luke closed his eyes. He breathed in the smell of her, rain and fear and life. He wrapped his good arm around her waist. He held her. Outside, the clouds were clearing. The bridge was gone. The road was broken. But in the quiet of the room, standing in the wreckage of the storm, they held each other up, for the first time in a long time. Luke didn't hear the sound of a bottle breaking. He only heard her breath and the beat of his own heart. Steady and strong. It wasn't a happy ending. It was a beginning, and that was enough. The mud did not dry overnight. In the weeks following the storm and the death of Silas Crow, the town of Oakhaven existed in a state of suspended breath. The rain had stopped, and the floodwaters had receded back into the banks of the creek, leaving behind a landscape that was scoured clean and piled high with debris. But the human landscape was slower to settle. The legal proceedings were not the swift hammer of justice that Luke Mercer might have wished for. They were a slow, grinding machinery of paper and procedure. Judge Holloway, true to his word, convened a grand jury, but the process was agonizing. Every day, Luke, Marie, Grace, and Lynn May had to walk from their temporary lodgings at the boarding house to the courthouse, and every day they walked through a gauntlet of eyes. The town did not suddenly embrace them as heroes. Real life is not a dime novel where the villains vanish and the townspeople cheer. The people of Oakhaven were embarrassed. They had allowed Silas Crow to rule them for a decade. They had looked away when Sarah Miller disappeared. They had laughed at Grace Whitfield. Now, faced with the undeniable truth of the ledger and the testimony, they did not feel gratitude. They felt the prickly, defensive shame of people who have been caught being small. Some apologized. Elias Thorne, the old marshal, came to them with his hat in his hands, weeping openly, begging for a forgiveness he did not believe he deserved. Luke gave it to him, not because Thorne had earned it, but because carrying hatred was too heavy a burden for a man who was trying to build a new life. But others doubled down. The men who had drunk Crow's whiskey and laughed at his jokes now spat on the boardwalk when Marie passed. They whispered that she was a witch who had seduced the river into killing a good man. They muttered that Luke was a vulture circling a carcass. "We are not winning friends," Luke said one evening. They were sitting in the small parlor of the boarding house. The fire was dying in the grate. Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying the first sharp bite of winter. "We do not need friends," Mari said. She was mending a shirt, her needle flashing in the lamplight. "We need the truth written down. And we need to survive the winter." Grace Whitfield sat by the window. She was no longer the terrified girl clutching a valise. The trial had forged her in fire. She had taken the stand 3 times, facing the sneering questions of Crow's lawyers. And she had not broken. There was a knock at the door. It was the head of the school board, a man named Mr. Abernathy. He looked uncomfortable, twisting his hat brim until the felt began to crack. "Miss Whitfield," Abernathy said, refusing to step fully into the room. "We find ourselves in a difficult position. The previous teacher, well, after the revelations regarding his association with Crow's faction, he has decided to move west." "He ran away," Grace corrected gently. Abernathy cleared his throat. "Quite. The point is, the school is empty. The children are running wild. We need a teacher." Grace looked at him. She knew what this was. It was not an apology. It was necessity wearing a suit. They did not want her, but they needed her, and they assumed she was desperate enough to take the scraps. "I will take the post," Grace said. Abernathy let out a sigh of relief. "Excellent. Of course, given the history, we would expect a certain level of discretion. No mention of the trial in the classroom." Grace stood up. She was small, but in that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. "I will take the post, Mr. Abernathy, because those children deserve to learn. I will teach them to read. I will teach them history. And I will teach them that the truth matters, even when it is inconvenient for the school board. If that is not discreet enough for you, you can teach them yourself." Abernathy stared at her. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then nodded once, stiffly. "Monday morning," he said, and turned to leave. When the door closed, Grace sat down. Her hands were shaking. "Are you sure?" Mari asked. "You know what they will say. They will watch you like hawks, waiting for a slip." "Let them watch," Grace said. She picked up her book. "I am done hiding. If I run now, I am telling them they were right to shame me. I am staying." Lin May found her own version of justice, and it was just as hard won. The court had ordered Crow's estate to pay back wages to the workers at the rail camp, including the wages stolen from her husband. It was a significant sum, enough to buy a ticket to San Francisco, enough to vanish into the anonymity of the city. But Lin May did not buy a ticket. She walked into the Mercantile, the same store where she had been refused service weeks before. The shopkeeper, a man named Henderson, went pale when he saw her. He expected a confrontation. Instead, Lin May placed a stack of gold coins on the counter. "I want to buy the lease on the old shed behind the livery," she said. Henderson blinked. "The shed? It is a ruin. The roof leaks. My husband was a carpenter." Lin May said, "I know how to fix a roof, and I know this town needs a laundry that does not ruin the collars of shirts." Henderson looked at the money. He looked at Lin May. He saw a woman who had been insulted, threatened, and dismissed, standing in his store with her chin high. His wife, a quiet woman who usually stayed in the back, stepped forward. She looked at her husband, then at Lin May. "The shed has a good stove." The wife said, "It just needs cleaning. I have some extra soap molds I am not using." Henderson looked at his wife, surprised. Then he looked back at Lin May. He pushed a piece of paper across the counter. $50 for the year. Henderson said. 40. Lin May countered. I have to fix the roof. 45. Henderson said. Done. Lin May said. She walked out of the store with the deed in her pocket. It was not a grand victory. She was still a Chinese woman in a town that viewed her with suspicion, but she had a piece of paper that said she belonged there. She had a foothold, and for the first time since she stepped off the boat, she was building something that was hers. For Mari and Luke, the aftermath was a quieter, more dangerous landscape. They were staying in a small cabin on the edge of town, a temporary arrangement until the legal status of the way station could be resolved. The intimacy that had begun in the high country, fueled by adrenaline and fear, now had to survive the mundane reality of peace. It was not easy. Luke was a man who knew how to survive a war. He knew how to ride through a flood. He did not know how to sit at a breakfast table and let a woman pour him coffee without feeling like he needed to earn it with blood. He spent his days repairing the cabin, chopping wood with a ferocity that worried Mari. He was fighting the ghosts of his past. He had killed men. He had done violence. And now that the gun was back in the holster, he was terrified that the violence was all he had to offer. One evening, Mari found him sitting on the porch, staring at his hands. The knuckles were still scabbing over from the fight in the river. You are thinking about leaving, Mari said. It wasn't a question. Luke didn't look up. I am thinking that a man like me brings trouble. He said, look at this town. Mari, they hate us. They are waiting for me to snap. If you stay, you are just a man, Mari said. She sat down beside him. Not a hero, not a gunfighter, just a man. That is the part that scares me. Luke admitted, I do not know how to be just a man. I know how to be a weapon. Mari reached out and took his hand. Her touch was firm, grounding. Then you learn, she said, like I am learning. She looked out at the darkened street. I spent 3 years thinking that being safe meant being alone. Mari said, I thought that if I let a man inside my walls, I was giving him the deed to my soul. I thought desire was just a trap to get me to lower my guard. She turned to him, her eyes dark and searching. I am scared too. Luke, I am scared that if I love you, I will start to rely on you. And if I rely on you, I will lose my edge. But I am looking at you, and I am realizing that I do not want to be a knife anymore. I want to be a hand. Luke looked at her. He saw the bruises fading on her face, the color returning to her cheeks. He saw the strength that had held a roof up in a storm. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. Teach me, he whispered. The rebuilding of their romance was not a thunderstorm. It was a slow, steady rain that soaked deep into the dry earth. It happened in the mornings, when the sun slanted through the window and caught the dust motes dancing in the air. They would drink coffee in silence, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. They didn't need to speak. The silence was comfortable, a shared space where they didn't have to defend themselves. It happened in the evenings, when the cold wind rattled the door. Luke would build the fire up, and Mari would read aloud from one of Grace's books. Luke would watch her, studying the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated, the way her lips moved around the words. Desire was there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but they approached it with a reverence that bordered on hesitation. One night, Mari initiated it. She blew out the lamp and crossed the small room to where Luke stood by the window. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. She didn't push, she didn't demand, she just stepped into his space and waited. Luke wrapped his arms around her. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of soap and sage. Are you sure? He asked into the dark. I am choosing, Mari said. That is the difference. They moved to the bed. It was not a frantic grasping. It was a slow exploration of boundaries. Luke moved with a restraint that cost him, checking her eyes, her breath, making sure that every touch was welcome. Mari tested her own trust, letting herself be held, letting herself be vulnerable, and finding that the sky did not fall. When he kissed the scar on her shoulder, she flinched, an old reflex. Luke stopped instantly. He didn't pull away. He just stopped, his lips hovering over the skin. It is all right, Mari whispered. "I am here. I am here too," Luke said. And in the darkness, with the wind howling outside, they laid the ghosts to rest, one kiss at a time. Winter hit Oak Haven hard. The snow came in November, burying the valley in 3 feet of white powder. The roads became impassable for wagons. The supply runs to the nearest railhead became dangerous tests of endurance. Luke found work not with a gun, but with an axe. He hired himself out to chop wood and clear roads. It was brutal, back-breaking labor. He came home every night exhausted, his muscles screaming, his hands blistered. But he came home. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He worked, and he brought the coin home to Mari, placing it on the table not as a tribute, but as a contribution. The town watched him. They saw him sweating in the cold, hauling timber. They saw him stop to help pull a wagon out of a drift. They saw him tip his hat to women on the street, even the ones who turned their faces away. Slowly, grudgingly, the narrative began to shift. He was no longer the drifter who had killed a rich man. He was the man who worked harder than anyone else. He was the man who was keeping the widow Delgado warm. There was a new marshal in town, a man sent from the territorial capital to clean up the mess Crow had left. Marshal Davis was a stern man with eyes like gray slate. He didn't care about the gossip. He cared about the law. He summoned Luke to his office one snowy afternoon. Luke walked in, expecting trouble. He stood before the desk, hat in hand. "I have gone through the files," Davis said, tapping a stack of papers. "The charges against you have been dropped. It seems the previous administration was creative with the facts." Luke nodded. "Thank you." "Marshal," Davis looked at him. "I am looking for a deputy. Mercer, someone who knows the country, someone who does not scare easily." Luke looked at the badge sitting on the desk. It was a piece of tin, but it carried a weight he knew well. "I appreciate the offer," Luke said, "but I am done carrying a gun for the government. I've got my own work to do." Davis studied him, then nodded. "Fair enough. But if you see trouble, you come to me. No more vigilante justice. No more vigilante justice." Luke agreed. He walked out into the snow. He felt lighter. The law had finally acknowledged he was free. Spring arrived with a roar of melting snow. The creek swelled again, reminding everyone of the flood that had changed everything. When the roads were finally clear, Marie told Luke it was time. "We need to go back," she said. They packed the horses. Grace and Lynn May came to see them off. Grace was wearing a sturdy wool dress, her hands stained with chalk. She looked tired but content. "Be careful," she said, hugging Mari. "And come back. My students need to hear the rest of the story." Lynn May stood by the laundry shed. Steam was rising from the vents. She wiped her soapy hands on her apron and shook Luke's hand. "The roof is holding," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Make sure yours holds too." Luke and Mari rode south. The journey to the canyon took 2 days. The land was greening up, the sagebrush putting out new shoots. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility. They reached the overlook at noon. The way station was still there. It looked lonely, perched on the edge of the canyon. The roof Mari had patched was still holding. The windows were dark, staring out at the empty space where the bridge used to be. They rode down to the water's edge. The creek was wide and calm now, shimmering under the blue sky. But the gap was absolute. The bridge was gone completely. The pilings had been washed away, leaving only the stone foundations on either side. Luke dismounted and helped Mari down. They stood on the bank, looking across the water. It was strange. For so long, the bridge had been the lifeline. It had been the thing that connected them to the world, but it had also been the choke point. It was the place where Crow had exerted his control. It was the trap. Now, there was just open water. "We cannot rebuild it," Luke said. "Not like it was. The timber is gone, and the bank is too unstable for new pilings." "Good," Mari said. She walked to the edge of the water. She picked up a stone and tossed it in. "I do not want a bridge," she said. "A bridge makes it too easy for men like Crow to decide who crosses." Luke looked at the current. The water was deep here, but slow. "We could build a ferry," he said, A flat-bottom raft on a guide cable. It takes work to cross. You have to pull yourself over, but it is steady. And if trouble comes, you can cut the cable. A ferry, Mari mused. She looked at the far bank. I like that. It is honest work. She turned away from the water and walked toward the station. She stopped at the porch steps. This was the place where she had stood with a shotgun, terrified and alone. This was the place where she had been assaulted. This was the place where she had learned to hide. She walked up the steps. She put her hand on the door latch. She hesitated. Luke stayed by the horses. He didn't push. He knew this was her threshold to cross. Mari took a breath. She thought about the shame she had carried. She thought about the nights she had spent listening for hoofbeats, praying to be invisible. She opened the door. The air inside was stale, but it was familiar. She walked to the counter. She saw the shotgun leaning in the corner. She saw the empty shelves where the whiskey used to be. She walked to the back room, the room where they had locked her up. The door was still cracked from where they had kicked it. She stood there for a long time. She let the memory wash over her. The smell of cheap tobacco, the rough hands, the fear that tasted like copper. Then she spoke into the silence. I am still here, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was steady. You took the whiskey. You took the toll. You tried to take my dignity. But you are dead. Silas Crow. And I am standing in my own house. She turned around and walked out. She didn't close the door to the back room. She left it open, letting the light flood into the dark corners. She walked back out to the porch. Luke was waiting. Are you all right? He asked. Mari nodded. She walked down the steps and stood in front of him. The sun was high overhead, bathing the canyon in a harsh, beautiful light. I am not hiding anymore. Luke, she said, I am going to open the station again. I am going to run the ferry. And I am going to put my name on the sign, Delgado's Crossing. Luke smiled. It was a slow smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Delgado's Crossing, he repeated. Sounds like a place that will stand. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. I'm a fair hand with a hammer, he said. And I know a thing or two about cables. If you are looking to hire a partner... Mari looked at him. She saw the man who had crossed a flooded river to save her. She saw the man who had held her while she cried in a rat-infested shack. She saw the man who had waited for her to choose him. I am not looking for a hired hand, she said. She stepped close to him. She placed her hands on his chest. I am looking for a man who knows that love is not a cage. I am looking for a man who will stay when the winter comes, and who will let me stand on my own 2 feet when the sun shines. Luke covered her hands with his. I am not going anywhere. Mari, he said, I am done running. My horse is tired, and my heart is right here. I choose you. Luke Mercer, she whispered. Today, and tomorrow, and every day the creek rises, I choose you, Mari Delgado. He answered. They kissed. It wasn't the desperate kiss of the storm, or the tentative kiss of the cabin. It was a kiss of arrival. It tasted of dust and sunlight and promise. They broke apart but didn't let go. They turned to look at the gap where the bridge had been. The view was different now. The obstruction was gone. There was only the wide, brown water and the immense, open sky above it. The path forward wasn't paved. It wasn't easy. It would require them to build a raft, to string a cable, to pull with their own backs against the current. There was no illusion of safety anymore. They knew the world was hard. They knew that floods would come, and men like Crow would always exist in some form or another. But as they stood there, hand in hand, watching the river flow, they knew they wouldn't face it alone. Luke squeezed her hand. Mari squeezed back. Let us get to work, she said, and together, they walked toward the timber to begin building the future. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from the first storm clouds to the open sky of Delgado's Crossing, and I am grateful you rode the trail with us. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your location. And if this story of the American West spoke to you, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more tales of grit, love, and survival on the frontier. I invite you to share your thoughts on the story in English. Did Luke and Mari make the right choice? What do you think of the new future they are building? Until the next campfire, ride safe.